Does Canada need to show more teeth when it comes to China? Picking up on the discussion we just had, former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull happens to think so. In a new memoir, he describes China as a bully and says all countries, including Canada, should stand up against bullies. Turnbull led Australia from 2015 to 2018 until he was ousted. In the first Canadian television interview about his book, A Bigger Picture, I asked him how Canada might get the upper hand with China, given all that's at stake.
In the imperial capital, whether it's Beijing or Washington, or Rome or Constantinople or London or Paris in their day, they regard deference as their due. So if you are sycophantic or compliant with an imperial power or a bully of any kind, that will just be accepted and ask for more. Think of the shopping scene in Pretty Woman. That's the psychology. So middle powers like Canada and Australia have to state their position very clearly, and when they draw a line in the sand, stick to it. Weakness will be exploited by bullies. That is, look, and that's true whether it's on the international stage or whether it is in the playground, right? So don't, that is a really, really important thing to make. And so, when we made the decision on Huawei, for example, my government made that decision. It was done we made the decision, we announced it, we did so in a very, very factual way. We didn't seek to demonize anybody. There was no flowery rhetoric or anything like that. But we just said, right, this is the line we've drawn here. This is why we're drawing it. And that's it. And while that was bitterly resented, it was respected. And, it was the same with the foreign interference and foreign influence legislation that quite a huge pushback from China. This is when we updated our foreign interference legislation and required transparency of people associated with foreign governments or political parties who are seeking to influence Australian, public affairs. There was a lot of resentment towards that from China. We did not take a backward step. We didn't react angrily. We didn't match, angry rhetoric with angry rhetoric on our side. We were just firm, polite, consistent, and that's what you've got. That is what you've got to do. I mean, just think about it. As I say, this is a question of psychology, and there's a lot in my book about it, as you know.
There is,
because I was dealing that Australia and Canada have to manage the relationship with the United States and China. Now, Canada's relationship to the United States is different to Australia's because you're a neighbour, you're contiguous, your economies are to a large extent integrated. And that has been one of the weaknesses that we've had, and I have to say, I think this is more, Canada. Ottawa thinks less about Australia than Australia thinks about Canada. If you know what I mean.
Why do you say that?
But true, I don't know. I think it's because you're absorbed. I think Canada tends to looks to Washington, and it looks to the Americas, and it looks to Europe more so than we do. But I think Australia and Canada have got so much more that we should do together. There is an Australian-Canada leadership group that meets every couple of years, but I think we should do a lot more together because we've got so much in common. If you think about it, apart from the climate, we've got just about everything in common. Multiculturalism, close allies of the United States, big, important relationship with China. Resources are a big part of our economy. Federalism, with all of its joys. I don't know whether you'd say this in Canada, but one of my former colleagues used to say, complaining about Australia's federation is like complaining about Switzerland's mountains. However frustrating, it's very hard to do much about it.
That was Malcolm Turnbull. I also asked the former Australian Prime Minister about claims he made in his book about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that a, quote, flaky Trudeau, as he termed it, humiliated world leaders during international trade talks, all because he was afraid of U.S. President Trump. I asked him about that allegation. Stay tuned for Mr. Turnbull's response in part 2 of our conversation. That's coming up next hour. Right now, I want to return to my interview with former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. His new memoir, A Bigger Picture, hits Canadian bookstores on June 9th. In it, Turnbull recalls a 2017 gathering of leaders about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, trade deal, during which Prime Minister Justin Trudeau skipped a planned meeting. He writes, I was extremely disappointed with Justin and felt really bad for Shinzo Abe. This was a very public humiliation. This last-minute backflip looked flaky. Had I misjudged him? In the first Canadian television interview about his book, I asked Turnbull exactly what happened.
What happened was the Trans-Pacific Partnership was largely American-led. It was a big priority of Obama's. Trump had said in his campaign that he would pull out of it, and everyone hoped that he could be talked out of that because there was the Republican Party generally, the business community generally in America were very supportive of it. Anyway, Trump didn't. He pulled out of it. Everyone thought the Trans-Pacific Partnership was dead as the dodo. And I didn't. And as I describe in the book, I persisted with it and was able to persuade Shinzo Abe to stick with it, and then other leaders, including Justin. The adjectives comprehensive and progressive were added at Canada's request, by the way. So they have literally no meaning at all, but they were added as part of the exercise to keep Canada involved. So the TPP was all agreed and all ready to go in the end of 2017. There was a signing ceremony agreed to, set up, and literally, as I say in the book, all the cameras were there. The Vietnamese Prime Minister was there, and we were all sitting around, pens poised, waiting for it to happen. And then we noticed Shinzo and Justin weren't there. And everyone started saying, what's going on? And then Shinzo turned up and, very, very disappointedly said that Canada had pulled out. And it was flaky. Look, there's no other way you can describe it, because the night before, the Canadian Trade Minister, Mr. Champagne, had said that it was all going ahead. So it was very disappointing. Anyway, look, the main thing was that we basically, Abe and I agreed that we were just going to press ahead. And if Canada pulled out, if Mexico felt it couldn't be in it, if Canada was out, well, it'd be a TPP 9 rather than a TPP 11. But we stuck with it, and thank heavens we did, because quite frankly, getting a big multilateral trade deal done like that today with the, enhanced sense of protectionism and chauvinism and, every man for himself that you're seeing in the global, in geopolitics at the moment, it'd be very hard. So it was a very important achievement, and very, glad we were able to do it.
So I spoke to as many people as I could who were around the Prime Minister in this country at that time, and they insist that that the Prime Minister met with Shinzo Abe prior to that moment, and that it became clear that there wasn't what Canada wanted in there, that there wasn't going to be a deal. They push back against the characterization of it being flaky and kind of pose at the idea, look, they were trying to get the best deal for Canada, and wouldn't you do the same thing in Prime Minister Trudeau's shoes?
No, I wouldn't.
Why not?
Look, as one of the other leaders said, at one point that Justin he'd been too weak to say no, and then he was too weak to say yes. I mean, it was just
Who said that?
I liked it. It's in the book, all in the book, by the book. But look, I like Justin. I think he was, when he became Prime Minister, he was represented as being a lightweight because he was young and good looking, bluntly. That's and if you're young and good looking, people, often older people, will say, it's all, show and no substance. I mean, they said that about Jacinda Ardern, by the way, when she became Prime Minister of New Zealand, and look what a leader she's developed into. So, so I never regarded Justin in that light. and I assume there was some vagaries of Canadian politics that underpinned it. But the fact was, we had every expectation that Canada was on board, not least because the Trade Minister the night before had said it was publicly. I mean, it was, look.
And nothing changed in the interim?
The events that I've described in the book are absolutely factual. That's exactly what happened. But these things do happen in politics. But the good thing is that we got it agreed. If there was some big issue with Canada, it should have been surfaced a lot sooner. You know, these pulling out of things at the last minute, whether it's in business or in international affairs, is always going to be seen as unusual, flaky, erratic. Call it what you will. But the most important thing is that in the final analysis, we got it all done. I don't know. Justin may have been worried about offending Trump. That's what a lot of people speculated.
Do you think that?
But the reality is, pardon?
Do you think that?
I don't know. I mean, this is people that were closer to the Canadians than me for speculating on that. But I think that the fact that the CPTPP exists is actually a great benefit to the Americans. And this is the case I put to the Americans. I was very plain. I spoke very plainly to them and to Trump personally and publicly when I was in Washington. I said, look, what we have given you is effectively a free option. You're pulling out of this deal in ordinary circumstances would have meant it was dead, as everyone said it was. And if we'd left it for 12 months, it couldn't be recovered. It would just be a pile of papers in a lawyer's filing cabinet somewhere. Now, what we were able to do by keeping it on foot, there is always the option for the Americans and other countries to join it. So, whether Trump might change his mind or a new president may say, right, we should be in that deal. And then the 11 members of the CPTPP will say, OK, let's talk about the terms on which you come in. The United Kingdom, for example, is actively discussing joining the CPTPP. Now, if we hadn't kept the deal alive, there wouldn't be anything for them to join. We recognise in this country that free trade and open markets means jobs and economic growth. And we are a massive beneficiary from that. So protectionism is never going to be in Australia's interest.
Do you think that recognition wasn't, sorry to interrupt, but do you think that recognition wasn't there necessarily for Canada?
One of the things that struck me about politics and government is that how parochial it is. We do not generally in government pay enough attention to what other countries and jurisdictions are doing. But nonetheless, you've got to look around and observe what others are doing, because we're all grappling with the same problems. And yet it's amazing, as a minister or as a prime minister, how rarely I would find the public service saying, well, this is what all these other countries are doing, and that's worked, that hasn't worked, et cetera, et cetera. So Canada and Australia, which have got, as I say, are so similar, we should be paying much more attention to what each of us are doing. That is my suggestion.
Sounds like the perfect note to conclude on. Thank you very much, Mr. Turnbull. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. Thank you. That's great.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.